Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Otoma Edje. I'm very excited to have on the program today LaToya Burrell, who has written this awesome book, Be Bold. And the subtitle is How to Prepare Your Heart and Mind for Racial Reconciliation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited you're able to join us because I feel like even as we shared just before we started, I think there was definitely a lot of, in my opinion, people getting some fatigue. And I felt there was going to be a backlash to all of what was going on in the world. And I just felt like something needed to happen that provided a different voice in some respects, not to counter what was happening, but to kind of add like a balm, if you will. I think probably some people had a chance to lament, and I feel like your book came just at the right time. So I know you're obviously in Minnesota, and we'll talk about that as we go. But as we start out, can you please share a little bit about yourself and also what inspires you to write this awesome book?
Wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about myself. As you just stated, I am located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am a Louisiana native. I moved to Minneapolis in 2013, and this has quickly become home for me. And just to give a little bit of background about myself, I usually talk about the hats that I wear. I'm a wife, a mother, a sister, friend. I wear so many hats. And at the time that George Floyd was murdered, I was serving as the Dean of Graduate Education and Accreditation at North Central University. I tell people often, I talk about this in my book, George Floyd was not new for me. I think many of us in the Black community can say this was not a new occurrence for us. But for me, this time just completely felt different. And I often say to people, this diversity and inclusion journey, or even this process that we call, some people will say is not so much about DE&I. This is just my life. It's your own trigger point on this journey. So the mile markers that we all begin or end at or pause at, they may differ. And for me, George Floyd being murdered was definitely a significant mile marker for me. I don't know if it's so much because I heard this grown man crying out for his mother and the fact that it got personal. And I thought about my two little boys who will grow up to be big Black men. I thought about my brother. I thought about my husband, my dad, my uncles. It just was different for me this time. And coupled with that, living so close and working so close to where he was murdered, definitely we could hear the protests. I remember when he was initially murdered and the tear gas impact, we could feel it miles away from where we live. And we live, I remember at the time I did a map quest just so I could be accurate. And I think it was like 3.5 miles away. And we felt it this far away from not where he was murdered, but Lake Street. When everything began to burn on Lake Street, we could feel that. I just remember vividly taking my son to the aftermath. My husband and I just decided to go and check it out, having to have a discussion with the, at the time, 5-year-old. He hadn't turned 6 yet, about what does YWCA 12 mean, because it was spray painted on everything. Who's George Floyd? And I never forget, he said, who's George Floyd? Because that's what he kept hearing with the protests. And then to further push the way I was feeling, the university was asked to host a memorial. And about this time, it was almost a perfect year ago now. At this point, I had begun to not be able to sleep at night. And so I began to write the book. But the memorial was on June 4th. This past Friday was the 1-year mark from the memorial. I hadn't begun writing the book then. That Friday, the memorial was on a Thursday. That Thursday, I remember making my first live Facebook video. And I said there, I'm coming here for accountability because I feel a stirring. And what does it mean? I don't know. But I'm purposely saying it to you all. And I remember saying in the video, if you know me, you know that I'm a person who, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And what am I saying I'm going to do? I don't know. But I'm just letting you all know that I'm feeling a stirring for something. That Sunday, I created a video on YouTube called Here's What You Can Do, because I kept getting calls from people checking on me first because I was here. And the question was, what can I do? How can I help? And I organically said, you can examine yourself. You can listen. You can learn. You can be bold. I said those things. I was not thinking about a book. Then I started making these videos on YouTube as a response to the first video. And I'm thinking, okay, this was that stirring that I'm feeling. I've done my part. I've made these videos. I'm done. Little did I know there was a book that was brewing inside, and no other way to put it, I went all in on the book. And once I was halfway through, my book is about 40,000 words, a little over 40,000 words. I was about 20,000 words in, and I started thinking, well, let me start to reach out to publishers, because I felt that it was a message that needed to be out now. And so that's a little bit about me and the book.
How long did it take you to write it?
I wrote the book in June. So I began writing the book, like I'm saying today, maybe a perfect 1 year.
Wow. Yeah.
Started writing the book around this time last year in June, and I went until August 1st. I set an August 1st deadline because around the 4th of July-ish, I spoke to a publisher, and my thing was, if I want to get this book out. He said, we could get it out by November 1st. I don't know if it was just a random date that he said. He said, we can get it out by November the 1st, but we would need 90 days. And so at that point, I said to him, it's going to be done by August 1st. Coupled with that, because I was still working at a university, I knew that we would kick back off in August. So I said, I'm just going to go all in. I'm not going to allow the semester to start again, and then I'm distracted. So I went all in June and July.
That's awesome. So as you just mentioned, you had it into, you started the YouTube videos and you had the 4 different components, which is examine, listen, learn, and be bold. Can you break those down a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So I say often with this process, you see people in the workplace. They'll start with, let's have courageous conversations. Let's have, implicit bias trainings or opportunities for people to learn. And I think oftentimes what happens with those is some people think that it's just a checkbox. I've attended, checkbox, I'm done. Or you have some people who they go and they listen attentively and they really want to grow from it. But the problem is they've not examined themselves. So their mind, they believe that their mind is ripe and ready, but their heart is not softened and ready for it. So with examine yourself, I start off by talking about how do you examine your heart and your mind just to make sure that you're ready for this process. I am definitely a fan of self-help books and professional development kind of books. And that's the response I've received from people. I'm a quick reader. I'm one who I get through books, but you cause me to pause in that first part of your book with the examining yourself. So I try to be very intentional of having you to think about your past, who you are, just the essence of who you are and why, and how that could subconsciously lead to you feeling the way you feel or not feeling the way that you don't feel. And so that's the examine yourself. For listen, I talk a little bit about, so listen and learn, I kind of combine those in the book. That's really the bulk of the book, the listen and learn section. For listen, and learn also, I talk a little bit about history. I do it from the perspective of my lens. I'm from Louisiana, so I talk about also African-American history because I'm a Black woman here in America. So I do that with the lens of trying to start about 400 years ago. Of course, you can't encompass history in one small chapter in a small book. So I am very intentional about just challenging my readers to let this be a lifelong journey and figure out how else you can continue to learn and grow. I like to tell people I'm continuing to learn and grow. I'm continuing to find topics of interest to dig deeper into. When I wrote the book, one of the things that was new to me was how many massacres there were. I knew about, of course, the Tulsa massacre. And in the last year, so many people have been educated about the Tulsa massacre as it just had its 100-year anniversary. But I then learned about how many others we didn't know about. So that was an area for me to learn and dig deeper into. And then a big part of the book is the 10 questions. So oftentimes what I will have happen is if I'm talking to someone about anything related to racial reconciliation, racism, diversity and inclusion, anything like that, you get questions. And I call those deflector questions, really. So it's don't all lives matter? Or, why are we still talking about this? We're post-racial. We had a Black president and now we have a Black vice president. We're post-racial, right? And so I try to, in the book, address those 10 questions from my vantage point. But because again, I'm learning, I tell people I encourage you to, excuse me, read this book with a group of people. I call it your growth group. And so at the end of all of the 10 questions, I have take it deeper questions for you to dig deeper. And then the final of the 4 is be bold. And that's a very short chapter where I say you have this information, I'll use it. I do like to add though, it's not, even though the book, it had to start and end somewhere, it's not a strict 4-step process. I tell people sometimes your first step may be you being bold, you deciding to even pick up the book and say, I'm going to read it. Or I've had some people who said, I picked up the book to read it. And you talked about a growth group early on. So I was bold and I invited people to join me. And some people will say I invited coworkers I invited people who I've never had discussions like this with, but I wanted a diverse group. So I invited people and they've accepted the challenge and we're reading the book together. So for that person, being bold may have been first for them.
No, I loved it. I think it was very, very helpful. I think it's a great introduction into the topic and a great perspective you provide. So in chapter 8, which is titled A Brief History Lesson, which you kind of just alluded to a little bit, you go through, history, as you said, from your perspective as an African-American woman here in the United States. Can you please share about some of the elements that stand out to you the most from history?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I'm going through history, one of the examples I talk about in my book is and as I'm talking to you, I'm looking up at my books on my bookshelf and I'm looking at Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. There's so much history in that book. One of my moments, and I call it an aha moment, I'm from Louisiana, a few miles south of New Orleans. It's called the River Parishes. And one thing that many people know, tourists will go to New Orleans, but they will want to do a plantation tour. Many of the plantations aren't in New Orleans. They are in the River Parishes area. So I have some friends who are Minnesota natives who we brought to New Orleans for the first time. And I tell this story in the book. And one of my girlfriends, she said she wanted to go to visit a plantation. And I say, yeah, this is about you. You're my guest, whatever you want to do. I didn't share with her. I grew up so close to these plantations, and no one who grows up close to those plantations go. I mean, in fact, it's free. You have to pay to go, but as a tourist, but if you are a person who lives there, it's free if you live in that. Louisiana has parishes as opposed to counties. So if you live in that parish, it's free. So we go on this tour, and I first learned the person who's doing the tour presumes that we're not from Louisiana. And when I say I grew up down the street, her next question was, who are your people? And when I said my mom's maiden name was Darensburg, her immediate response was, oh, yeah, that's German. And I didn't know that. I had no idea. And so I immediately started probing my mom and her aunts, her sisters, about Darensburg. Well, one of my aunts spent time in Germany. And I said, did you know your last name was German? And she said, I had noticed that there were Darensburgs in Germany, but it didn't even click to her. And so I started digging, and then I met my great grandfather. He passed away when I was a teenager. And I'm looking at him like, he looks German. Like, how did I not know that? How did we not know that? And my grandfather, so this great grandfather's son, my mom's dad, I'm like, did he even know that? He passed away 7 years ago. I'm like, I wish I could have had this discussion with him. So it causes me to dig deeper. But then it also brings up the fact that we don't have the pleasure of knowing. So when I meet people here, since I've been in the Twin Cities, who will say, I'm Irish, I'm Swedish, and we don't have the luxury to know that. So I can tell you that I'm Black or that I'm African American, whatever you want to hear. But I don't know my African origins. I don't know if it was, if I'm Senegalese. I don't know if it's Liberian. I don't know. And to add insult to injury, I didn't even know German. So then I learned the history of the fact that Germans were sent to Louisiana to teach slaves how to cultivate the land, and how there's history that the German fishermen and farmers pretty much saved New Orleans from famine. So here I am learning this history. So that was one piece. But again, this is me. The second piece was the whole fleur de lis. That's, we have that.
Yes.
Our home is decor to
That was
learn
throwaway.
that, and we have it, and just sharing that with my family. I know people who get tattoos of fleur-de-lis from New Orleans, and to think the history that's associated with the fact that it was used to brand slaves. So then at this point, I'm digging into slave codes and Black codes and just learning. So now what I tell people is that's the history that links to me. And the final piece I'll say is the Emancipation Proclamation, the piece that they choose to teach in schools, and to learn that it did not, if I say it didn't free all slaves, some people would say, now that people are learning about Juneteenth, well, yeah, we know about Juneteenth and the fact that it took 2 years. And I'll say, no, even deeper than that. It specifically calls out areas, and those parishes are listed. So I say to people—
That blew me away. I had no idea about that.
So many people don't know about that. So, and it's not—
And the Emancipation Proclamation is not that long.
It's not that long. I put the entire proclamation in the book because it's so short and to the point. But, what's taught in school is that Abraham Lincoln was a great guy and freed slaves. We don't learn about Juneteenth. We don't learn about the exceptions in the proclamation.
I want to stop you right here. To clarify, the Declaration of Independence does not— the Emancipation Proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation does not free all slaves. Did not free all slaves. We're not talking about new Jim Crow and continuation of things, but specifically there were slaves in certain parishes that were still under slavery.
Yeah, that's right. And it hit home for me because, like I said, it specifically lists the parishes. And I grew up in St. Charles Parish, and between St. Charles and St. John. And my husband is from Orleans Parish, and all of those parishes were in there. As I'm speaking to you, I flipped right to the page. It says the following. It basically says, except the parishes of St. Bernard, Plaquemine, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James, Assumption. This is page 51. And pretty much it lists all of the parishes that from my childhood, most of the people who I knew and interacted with lived in these parishes. So it just hit home in a different way for me. Like I said, for me to go back to New Orleans, my sister lives in a subdivision that is still called Ashton Plantation. It's still really nice houses in this subdivision. And I'm like, I can see it in two ways. The fact that it still carries the name, and now Black people can actually own property in here. I can see it, in two ways, but in fact, the plantation names still follow most of the really nice subdivisions along that area. But what I tell people is, for me, just doing a little bit of digging was such an eye opener. So I've done a couple of growth groups, and I tell people, I give them homework before you start. I say, I would encourage you to do the history of your own hometown. Just do the history, just do the digging. Even if you tell me my town was 99% white, I say just do some digging and see what you learn. And it doesn't have to be that I'm trying to point you to slavery. Just see what you learn. And it's always fascinating to hear people come back and share what they learned about their hometowns and about their families. So
they've shared that in their growth groups?
Yes. So I've had some growth groups that I've had the pleasure of. If someone is organizing one, and I welcome anyone to do this. I have a link on my website that says, reach out. I'm definitely interested in connecting. So I've had some people to take me up on that, and they'll say, we're kicking off a growth group and we're going to meet 6 times. Could you join for one of our sessions? So I might join for the kickoff, or for some groups I've done the first and last. I'll come in for 30 minutes at the beginning and then for the last session. So it's just been so neat to hear firsthand people say the things that they feel have been growth for them.
That's awesome. So continuing on the topic of growth, in chapter 9, you share about the stages of growth in our journey to becoming culturally competent. Can you please break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah. So, there are so many different resources out there that, again, I'm a constant learner. I'm a life learner myself. After I published this book, I came across additional resources. And the whole takeaway is there's multiple zones, if you want to see it that way. So in the book, I specifically talk about the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. And there's a depiction that goes along with that. I want to say it's it wasn't him, but it was Ibram Kendi. And he was the one who first put out the growth zone chart that some third party made. And they tell you what it might look like for you to be in those 3 different zones. So the fear zone, and it also could look different based on your race. So it may be I'm in the fear zone and I'm not talking about it because it makes me uncomfortable, because I'm uncertain, because I don't want to offend anyone. My experience has been, as a Black woman, that fear zone comes with the uncertainty of you don't want to compromise. I talk about this in the book as well. I don't want to be viewed as the angry Black woman. I don't want to compromise what I believe I've worked for. So I might sit in the fear zone. And then the learning zone is that the very thing you're learning. And so for some, they may say, I'm learning about implicit biases. I'm learning about microaggressions. I am learning about just different forms of diversity and inclusion.
That's what I was able to find.
Yes, that's the one. That's the exact one that I'm talking about. The one that you have listed there. It looks just like that. And it expounds a little bit more on the 3. But one other thing, there is this organization. I don't want to misquote the organization, but they have a model. It's called PCIHO. And they talk about these 5 different levels that you can be in. Like the H is hesitator. The O is obstructor, and it talks about what that might look like in your zone. So I think it's important for people to understand where they are and where they want to be. And even though I don't specifically talk about that in this very short chapter, another one is the IDI. So a lot of people will do that, the IDI assessment, and when they realize that they are in the, I'm about to butcher the IDI, not minimizer. I believe it's minimizer. And you'll get some people who will say, I don't believe myself to be a minimizer. And then you get that IDI consultant to walk you through. And then it's like, oh yeah, I am that. And I say to people, if your zone matches up with your desires, you're human, you have the right. But if I am in the fear zone or in the minimizing zone, and that is not my desire, then I have work to do. But no one can tell me, here are the 10 steps to get from fear to learning or learning to growth. It has to be authentic for you, because we're different. Our experiences are different. Everything about us is different. So you have to fit what works for you on this journey. And one of the big things I say too is I get people who tell me I'm not a reader. I don't like to read. And I say, that, and I don't want to call it an excuse. That would have been a barrier 20 years ago. And even then, arguably not, because there were cassette tape audios then. But now we have such ease of, you don't have to read the book. There's audio books, there's Audible. The public libraries have free versions of them, right? Mm-hmm. There's YouTube, podcasts, webinars. You can just listen if you don't want to read. You can watch documentaries. There's so much out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm glad it came to you really quickly, the examine, listen, learn, and be bold as far as those, groupings. And I definitely think they apply. Now, in the learn section, you have, I think it's listen, learn, I'll put it together. You have the 10 common questions that people have about race relations. Could you actually read all 10 of them and then maybe share about a couple, 2 or 3 of them in a little bit more detail, just so people get a flavor of the things that you address?
For sure. So the 10 questions, the first is, I didn't own a slave, so why should this matter to me? Or I wasn't a slave, so why does this apply to me? The second is, I don't see color, so why does this apply to me? The third is, I am not a racist. When examining my heart, it's clean. I took it a step further for this question. I love everyone with the same love of Christ, so how does this apply to me? The fourth question, why do diversity and inclusion initiatives and race discussions in general focus on Black and white when there are many other races, cultures, minority groups? The fifth is, all lives matter. So why do we say Black lives matter? Number 6, if Black people don't commit crimes, they will not have issues, right?
I love that one.
Thank you. Number 7, why can't Black people simply work harder? After all, we have access to the same freedoms here in America, right? Number 8, we had a Black president and Black people have good jobs and equal access. Doesn't that make America equal and post-racial? Number 9, why can't I just ignore racism? I am not racist, and this topic makes me uncomfortable. And then finally, why protest? It does not work. Surely there must be a more peaceful way to address these issues.
Thank you. Can you maybe share about a few of them? I think the ones that stood out to me were 8 and 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I will actually make a comment about number 7 and then 8 and 9. But for 7, I just made a comment earlier about the massacres. So I talk a lot about the massacres in this section because, one of the trends that you see with the massacres is typically Black communities trying to have self-sufficiency and independence. But if it's a threat to an economy of others or a perceived threat, then there must be a reason to destroy it. Also, unfortunately, what the linkage was to some of these massacres, the reason for burning Tulsa, the reason for burning down some of these other communities, Rosewood, there were a few communities in Louisiana as well, was always a allegation that a Black man made a pass or some kind of inappropriate gesture towards a white woman. There's so much history that goes into that as well. Robin DiAngelo talks about, she has a whole chapter in her book, White Fragility, called White Women's Tears. I say this in the book. We saw this play out with a woman last summer in Central Park who said, I'm going to call the cops and say that a Black guy is threatening me. She didn't just say a guy. We saw it play out in the first movie that hit the screen, The Birth of a Nation. The whole idea, this movie ends with this white woman choosing to jump from a cliff because they made it like this Black guy was. So you get where I'm going with that. So the whole idea is, in this chapter, I talk about the fact that when there's Black stability or self-sufficiency, it's destroyed. I also talk about the Claude Anderson example of the Monopoly example, the whole, you're playing Monopoly and you can't win. So every time you get property, every time you get something that's taken from you, it's destroyed, it's burned. The rules change. I've seen that happen so many times in my life. Even it'll be something that this is what the standard is, and then when we catch up or we begin to do it, then the rules change. For number 9, you said number 8 and 9. Number 8, we had a Black president. Doesn't that make us equal? Yeah. I have seen this come up a ton more so now that we have a Black vice president. I wrote an article after Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris as his running mate. And I say why I am so excited, or why Black women are so excited. And I can't speak for all Black women, but I point out in this short article how it's so much more than just a vote. So I had someone to respond to my article and say, I'm not sure, this is a great article. I'm not sure that she will want you to ignore the heritage, the fact that her mom's from India. And I said, that's great. A woman of that heritage should write an article. I can't speak about how women from India feel about this. I can't. I can only speak from the Black experience, number one. I only could look at the fact that she has pride in her HBCU. She has pride in her sorority. And that doesn't mean that she's not proud of who she is holistically. She talks about her mother a lot. And so it makes me think of how, had it been something negative that she was doing, no doubt about it, she would have been a Black woman. It would be no question. Her skin's Black. She went to Howard. She's in a Black sorority. She's a Black woman. But in her success is questioned. Same thing happened with Barack Obama. If he had done something, committed a crime, that Black man. But because he's Harvard educated, at the time, POTUS, educated wife, it was a question. Is he even Black? Is he even an American citizen, a U.S. citizen? So, I talk about that a little bit in the book. I talk about some other, it's funny because it all runs in for me. A lot of the topics, it may be something that I can say, I talked about this in the book, but I don't remember exactly what question I put it under because frankly, a lot of it can fall under all of the questions. But, I'm looking in the book right now, and ironically, I do talk about Barack Obama being a, Harvard educated lawyer, yet there were still questions about him. And at this time, I'm talking about now Vice President Harris as a running mate. And then there are the questions of how they choose, the media chose to portray her in certain ways to perpetuate that angry Black woman stereotype. But it just lets me know that despite people saying we're post-racial, so many things happen every day to let me know that it's not. We're not.
Yeah, and I think you also, the thing that stood out to me also was just your personal experiences, is what you covered in question 9. I think question 8, in reference to code switching and
yes,
just how you're treated at work in different respects and so forth. So I think that was very helpful.
Yeah. I mean, this section talks about the discrimination that happens with job applicants. You know, when I was writing the book, I tell personal stories. So I would think about some of my friends from college, law school, childhood, and I would text them and say hi and just be like, you remember when this happened? So I texted one of my friends and said, do you remember when you wanted to use a different name on your resume? And she was like, I do. And this same friend, she wouldn't wear her. So it's not just race. This same friend said she didn't want to wear her engagement ring because there was the presumption that she's going to get married and want to have kids, you know? So it's that this all ties to our, for some people, to implicit biases as well. If you have these biases about, you know, Black women in general, when I show up, that shows up with me. And I know in this part of the book, I talk about a partner at a firm that I worked at who would call me T. Like he would, you know, my name is LaToya, and I never, trust me, I'm 100% sure. In fact, when I first started working at the firm, there were other associates who would say to me, you know, you're so formal, you dress up you know, we're a little bit more casual here. But my thing was, I'm comfortable like this. You know, I don't see me wearing heels being a threat. But this guy would say, what up, T? And I'd say, good morning. Like, you know, and it really made me uncomfortable. But the power dynamics, he's a partner, I'm an associate at this point. I go home and complain to my husband. And it wasn't until he approached me one day with profanity and was basically like, that B so-and-so pissed me off today. I was about to call you to go all sister girl on her. And with the gestures you see me doing is what he was doing. And I said, I'm not certain what you mean. And that was it. After that, he apologized. He never did it again. But, you know, why is it that we have to get past those things? So we are definitely not post-racial. I will say, I personally feel like a lot of work is being done. I'm asked the question number 9, why can I just ignore racism? I'm not racist. It makes me uncomfortable. I tell people this conversation makes Black people uncomfortable too. It makes everyone uncomfortable, but are we just gonna sit in our discomfort and let it dominate the space? Let it dominate our work environments? Let it dominate any social circles? I would rather just talk about it and us have control and us move on. And in this chapter, I point out the whole who threw the bomb. When the Birmingham church was bombed, and Charles Morgan said it, who threw it? We all threw it. And so I say,
well, I get just for the listeners, can you explain when you say who threw the bomb, what you're referring to?
Yes, so there was a bombing that took place in Birmingham, and it happened. It was the 16th Street Baptist Church, 1963 to be specific. I know about this because I'm in an organization that highlights it every single year. And so 4 little girls were killed in this bombing. And the day after the bombing took place, preacher Charles Morgan Jr. basically opened up. He already was scheduled to be a speaker at the Young Men's Business Club at Birmingham. And the next morning, he opened up the speech by basically saying, who threw the bomb? And so he's addressing this group of men, predominantly white men, and he's asking them who threw the bomb that killed those little girls. And it's a heartfelt speech. You can find, I believe it's out there on YouTube. You can find it. And his conclusion is, you know what? We all threw the bomb. We all threw it. If we were silent, if we're complicit. So we all threw that bomb. So I use that as an example to say that this still rings true today. If we're comfortable or uncomfortable and it's causing us not do anything and be silent, then we are just as guilty as Derek Chauvin for putting a knee on George Floyd's neck. We are just as guilty of George Zimmerman for shooting Trayvon Martin, or those officers who killed Breonna Taylor in her bed. We're just as guilty.
And that leads to the next part of your book, which was be bold, right? To not just let things happen, but to be bold. So thank you. So what's been the response to your book? How are people taking it? I know you mentioned the growth groups and different things like that, which I think is great. So what's been the general response?
I think the general response has been good, and I appreciate that. You know, I have had some people who get caught with the beginning. They're like, you caused me to pause and think, that examine yourself. I have others who will say, man, those 10 questions, you know, it made me happy to even have my grandmother say to me, those 10 questions, you know, or my great aunt who is about to be 80. And my grandmother said, you know, I would hope that my great aunt doesn't watch this, because my grandmother was like, you know, she's usually such a hard critic, you know, but she loved your book. Those 10 questions, you know. So that's been good. Definitely the growth groups and just the opportunities for me to just share space with different people, such as right now, as well as grow on my own. I will say this, when the book first came out, if you had asked me who was the intended audience, I would tell you the audience is for anyone who has a heart. So because I'm talking about examining your heart, examining your mind, if you are human, this book is for you. But deep down inside, I was thinking, this book, I'm targeting the church. So I had, when I narrowed it down to publishers and, you know, sent in what I had written at the time, one publisher said, you might want to take out the scripture. You're going to close off your market. You won't be able to get into corporate spaces. You know, you might want to consider taking out the scripture. At the time, I didn't have a cover. At the time, I said I wanted my title to be Bold, but I said I can compromise on the title. I can compromise on whatever the cover looks like, but I don't want to compromise on the scripture. That, you know, I'm very personal in the book. And to me, if we're having a discussion in a corporate space about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the very act of you asking me to not share a difference that I have, which is my religion, that would be just the same as you asking me, could you just not say you're a woman? Or could you just not say that you're a Black woman? So that's how I see it. And so I say, yeah, that's fine. Ironically, my book has been most received by corporate settings, state entities, law firms. What I have not had the opportunity to really explore yet has been the church setting. I was hopeful that there would be more churches that would take the book, use it with, you know, different growth groups in the church, depending on what kind of church you are. I know some churches do cell groups or life groups, whatever you want to call them. That is what I have not had to happen. So, you know, I set goals for myself. My goal for this quarter was to get my book into audio format, which is out of my hand now. It's off to Audible. And
That's awesome.
Yes, thank you. So the next phase for me is I want to be intentional about reaching out to churches. If it takes me drafting letters, reaching out to lead pastors, sending courtesy copies, you know, because I really do feel that a big part of this change, and when I say racial reconciliation, and I've even had the discussion there where some people have said to me, well, we don't like reconciliation because the thought of reconciliation is that we must have been whole at some point. And, you know, at that point, I will take the faith lens with you. You know, if God created us, it was perfect. We were once whole. So that's my stance. And I do believe that the whole reconciliation the church is going to have to step up and lead. I think that's what I believe is going to be the body that moves this. It's going to be a movement. And I think it's going to have to start with the church. So I'm going to have to be bold on my own, put any pride that there might be aside, and intentionally reach out to the church.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll keep talking because I think there's probably some opportunity. So, we definitely want to get it in front of as many church folks, so to speak, as possible. So you may have addressed this question a little bit already, but you may want to elaborate. So the question is, what are some of the key lessons or actions that you would like people to take away from your book? And second part to that is, what are some immediate steps people can take to start addressing racism?
Yeah, so I think one of the key lessons is for me the whole examining piece. I think we have to start talking about these things, and we can't continue to hide behind discomfort. Um, I think that it's okay for us to, like, I've had so many people say to me, um, my parents are racist. I was raised in a racist home. I will also say this though, when my book first came out, I remember it hadn't come out yet. I posted on Facebook that I had a book coming out pre-sale. So this was mostly family and friends. And I got a lot of Black family and friends say to me, I'm going to buy this book for all of my white friends, for all of my white coworkers. And my response to them was, well, get yourself a copy too, because we are human and we've been hurt along the way and we have work to do too. So when I talk about this reconciliation, there's work on both parts. And another piece that I say is with that comes the truth. So with the truth comes us having to learn and us having to do the work. So the reconciliation is no good without truth, and the reconciliation is no good without us having a willingness to work on it from both sides. I know a lot of Black people who, I say this, if you were alive in the 60s and old enough to remember the 60s, people are scarred. People don't trust, and you have to understand that. So even when I speak to my grandmother and she's just telling me stories about things, and it's like, well, that's just the way things were. Or my father-in-law who's 81, and he tells stories about, I write about this in the book, about going to the church and having to sit on the back row, remembering the white or Black only bathrooms and counters and segregation. People, there are scars and wounds there. So the reconciliation definitely is going to take work on both sides.
Yeah, and I'm trying to recall. I know your book is definitely about, as you mentioned, the heart and the mind, and facing the facts and understanding history, and obviously the four elements: examine, listen, learn, and be bold. Um, how does that work for anti-racism in the sense of, some of our communities, it doesn't matter. We may not have like hatred in our heart about, certain people, so to speak, but just simply by existing and allowing things to continue the way they are, we're actually perpetuating the system. How do you address that?
Yeah, I think people have to learn. And so, I say I'm just going to say it was intentional. In the book, The 10 Questions, I don't say systemic, but I talk about a lot of systemic issues. So I literally had a list, and I made it a point to make sure that all of these topics fit somewhere in the book. So I specifically talk about systemic issues in healthcare, in education, environmental issues. I talk about.
I'm glad you included environmental. That a lot of times is missed.
Yeah, well, I'm from the river parishes, and is known as Cancer Alley, and that's the same area. So I talked about environmental, and I did that on purpose, because what happens is I know people who will say, well, I am doing the anti-racist work, or I am very inclusive in my circle, I'm intentional, but they will say, I had someone tell me who's from the Twin Cities, she didn't know anything about redlining. So I directed her to the Jim Crow of the North documentary, and how the zoning and things are still impactful today. So, you might feel like, well, the little action that I do is not going to change everything, but it's the little steps that count. So I say to people in that space, even with the anti-racism work, that's great. With the whole implicit bias work, I say the whole idea is you're doing this work so the things in your subconscious can be brought up to your conscious, and you can then make changes. So you just learn about these systems. I had someone, and I try to be intentional also. When I have someone tell me, I don't really know any structures or any systems. I had someone who told me that in education. So I said, well, let's talk about standardized testing. Let's talk about, the redlining and how that impacts tax dollars that goes to public schools, and how you do in school dictates the college you go to, and how you do it. Let's talk about standardized testing that's used to determine who gets accepted. Let's talk, people don't see that as systems. If you've been on the receiving end, and not a person who have been prevented from some of these luxuries, you may not see it. But once it's pointed out, now you have the conscious choice to decide to not see it anymore because it's convenient for you and your kids and your family members. So I think my answer there is, even with the anti-racism work, It's you just continuing to learn. One of the things that I'm doing right now, and I continue to do them, it doesn't hurt for me to, I think it drives my husband and for sure my oldest son nuts, because I usually will have my Bluetooth in, my little AirPods, and I'm cooking, but I'm listening to something. I'm working out, but I'm listening to something. I'm multitasking. And so I constantly do 21-day equity challenges. Even if it's a refresher or repeat, I don't care if I go through a whole 21 days and only find out about 3 new resources. It was worth my 21 days. So just figuring out how you can continue to learn.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. I definitely agree with the being a lifelong learner. On that topic, what are some resources that you recommend people start with who want to learn more about making a difference in our world regarding racism?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm biased, but I would say my book leads you to, I tell people I'm pointing you to resources, and that's why I say a growth group, because I'm not giving you everything. I'm telling you about this topic. I remember somebody told me they had never heard of code switching. I said, well, you can go out there on YouTube and watch a lot of videos on code switching. If there's articles about it. I would say though, for that person, the first challenge would be to get you a growth group to do it with. If you don't have access to the book and you're thinking, you know what, I want a free resource that I can start now, I would say join an equity challenge. There's so many. If you Google equity challenges, I know I'm actually about to.
Can you define that equity challenge? What is that specifically?
Yes. So there are certain organizations that will do 21-day racial equity challenges. And so you join them for 21 days, and every day they'll send you an email, and that email will have resources for you to either read or short videos to listen to, and it'll be topical. So they're free, and a lot of organizations are doing them. I do know I can promote one that's about to start, I think on June 21st, because I also, when I do them, I like to invite people to join. I'll say, hey, I'm doing this racial equity challenge. You should join me. And for those 21 days, we can just start a group chat and we can just chat about things. So I'm doing.
You can send me the information for that. I can put it in the show notes for people.
Absolutely. And so the one that I'm starting on the 21st is hosted by the YWCA of St. Paul. So I will share that with you. And it's free. You just sign up and they'll send daily emails.
Okay. So if people want to learn more about you, how can they find out about you?
Yeah, so my website is www.theboldlatoyaburrell.com. And as stated earlier on in the segment, I respond to my emails. I absolutely love hearing or getting emails from people who I don't know who will say, thank you for writing the book, or thank you, or want to invite me to growth groups or things like that. So on the website, there's a contact form, or the email is info@theboldlatoyaburrell.com. I would love to hear from anyone who would want to go deeper.
Before we log off, we have some questions, a quick round right here.
Okay.
So we have 11 questions. Favorite cuisine? LaToya, what's your favorite cuisine?
I am a Southern girl. I love New Orleans cuisine, red beans and rice, comfort food, crawfish, seafood dishes, things like that.
You just reminded me, in Boston, I think I had I want to say it was a clam bake or something with sausages and, the layers. And
yes.
Yeah. All right. Favorite film or series?
My favorite film or series, this is weird. My husband always tells me that I'm indecisive. I don't feel like I could just pick one movie. I love comedies, but I also like, I was just talking to my mom about Eve's Bayou. That movie was filmed in Louisiana, and she said she never saw it. And I'm like, how did you not see Eve's Bayou? The movie's like 20 years old. So I don't have one. I just love art, music, that shows that explore different areas.
Okay. What's your morning routine?
Well, I like to sleep, but that's not always the case. I have 2 small kids, so I am trying to get into a place where my mornings can be a little more laid back for just me to have time for me. I can tell you it doesn't include working out. I've always envied those morning gym people. I cannot do morning workouts. So it's usually worrying about everybody else in my house, but I'm trying to change that.
All right. So you're a night person?
I would consider myself to be more of a night person.
Okay. What do you prefer, paper Bible or digital Bible?
I like them both, but I definitely keep my paper. I'm looking at it right there. It's something about the paper that I prefer.
Okay. What's your favorite book of the Bible right now?
Galatians.
Okay. Actually, I learned something the other day that when the Message Bible was written, um, the author Eugene Peterson actually started with Galatians because of a lot of the racial tension that was going on, and he wasn't able to communicate with the church effectively. They just were like not really. It was just the words were just glossing over him, and so he had to take it into American koinonia, so to speak, and that's how he started the Message Bible. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
What's your favorite Bible character?
It's easy to say Paul, but I'll just stick there. I'm not gonna switch up. It's easy to think about Paul and just that transformation and just so many lessons. And maybe it's because most of the books of the Bible come from Paul, Saul. But yeah, Paul.
Okay. Outside the Bible, what's your favorite book or author?
My favorite author, I love Priscilla Shirer. I was just telling one of my friends yesterday, Priscilla, same for the Bible, same for my books. I like to have my books on Audible and print copies. So I will start with a book on Audible, and then a little bit in, I'm like, I need this in print. So Priscilla Shirer has two books. One is called Discerning the Voice of God, and the other is called Fervent. It's like a woman's battle plan for strategic prayer. And I listen to that when I'm working out. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. When I'm done, I just start all over. And I just started it again this past weekend, maybe Friday, whatever day I went running, I listened to it again. And every time it's like the first time I've listened to it. So I'm a huge Priscilla Shirer fan.
That's awesome. So if you were to recommend one book that someone reads in the next 12 months, what's that one book you'd recommend?
I recommend my own book. Now, if you want to say beyond my book, then it would also depend on, if it's a woman. I find myself liking self-help books. So like I said, the Priscilla Shirer book, Fervent, is written for women. I think it could be applied to more people. I like Valerie Burton's Successful Women Think Differently. She has a lot of scripture in her book too. So it's a Christian book from that lens as well. So Beyond, Be Bold, those are my go-tos.
Sounds good. Favorite place to live?
We love Minneapolis. I get the question often, how did you leave New Orleans to come to this snow? And we love it. I love the Twin Cities, despite all that has happened here. I think people who don't know the city, they're like, where the heck do you live? They don't get it, but we love the Twin Cities. Both of my kids were born here. It's just been a good place for us.
And where would you most like to visit?
I have not been
to travel now.
I have not been to Africa, but Africa will be in my near future. So I would love to get to the motherland.
That's awesome. All right, last two. Team Apple or Team Android?
Apple. I can't do the Android. Maybe I'm just not giving it enough of a shot. My husband, he has a personal iPhone and his a Samsung work phone. And he's like, they're both great, but I'm a Apple girl.
Yeah, they had a big conference today, so more software and improvements and all that good stuff.
Well, I don't like that aspect of it, but
And what are your favorite apps?
My favorite app, I don't tell Google, but I always tell people if Google charges us a membership fee, I'll pay it. I use Google every single day. I don't understand how. It's just we have everything at our fingertip. So even if Google leads me to YouTube, which I use a lot, but Google is my favorite app.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking time to join us today, Ms. LaToya. I do want to just share for those that watch this program to consider subscribing if you got some value out of this program. And if you want to be notified about future episodes that address how we can understand that we're made in the image of God and how we can also reflect that image to the rest of the world. I also want to give a shout out to my good friend, Young Wood, who is in Texas. He's been helping me to grow my channel little by little. So just wanted to give him a quick shout out. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time, and have a great rest of your Monday.